Alrighty, we are here with Dr. Stephen Pritzker, one of the most creative minds that you'll ever come across. We joke about how certain people are just kind of really good at creativity, but not many can say that they wrote the book or conceived of the book on creativity, the Encyclopedia of Creativity. Stephen, Dr. Stephen, however you prefer, Dr. P, Dr.
Oh,
not Dr. P.
yeah.
All right, anything but that one. Thank you so much for joining. How you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Let me make a note not to call you that one, but we're
I
gonna get
think
into
it's
all.
self-explanatory.
We're gonna get into all things creativity and beyond. And um, as soon as I came across you, I was just blown away by what you've done throughout your career, and now for decades now, giving back to the next generation in terms of creativity and all everything there. But there was one stop of your career from the creative writing standpoint that really jumped out at me, and that is on Breaking Away. And I know it was the show Breaking Away, correct?
Yeah, yeah. I just wrote one episode of that. That's interesting that it jumped out at you.
Yeah. Well, the reason it was because I saw the name Breaking Away. I went to IU, Indiana University,
Okay,
and
that's
so
yes.
Breaking Away is huge. Like everybody, people get fired up, watch it around the time a little 500. My parents actually went to IU as well. They met at IU, so like growing up, they talked about that movie and watched it as a kid. So really, really cool. So anyway, so I was very familiar with the movie Breaking Away. I didn't know until looking up your background about that show, and so maybe that's why you only did one episode of it.
It,
Seems like it was cut
it,
short.
it came and went. It didn't get picked up, but we basically, for the episode I did, reproduced the bicycle race as racing in bathtubs, as I recall. So it was basically not that creative because it was the same dynamics that the movie had. But I liked the movie very much, and I was in Indiana for 10 years when I was young, and so I had that kind of connection to the culture there.
Oh, yeah, that's special. Do you mean living in Indiana or with ties to IU?
No, I lived in Indiana. I've never been to Bloomington. No,
Oh, okay. You got to go. Will be the research for the next episode of Breaking Away. No,
yes,
but
reboot. Yeah. Mm.
it's a special place, and that's just a sneak peek at some of the awesome creative writing you've done. But I think if anybody looks at your background, like you're in a 75 episodes for TV, super impressive. I think the name that jumps out at anybody is the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And uh, how did you kind of get your foot in the door in terms of writing for what would be actually TV shows?
Well, it's kind of a disorganized process. A lot of people move to LA, which I was told to do by somebody, a friend of a family who was producing Andy Griffith's show. I liked the Dick Van Dyke Show, the original one where he was a comedy writer. And I thought I was disenchanted with my business experience, even though I'd majored at business in school. And I just decided that just take a 360-degree turn at the age of 24 and moved to LA with no credits, hadn't even really written only half a script, and for quite a risky move. But when you're 24, you don't necessarily think about risk in the same way as you do when you're older. So it was quite a struggle, but it didn't last long. I mean, I got in within 3 or 4 years, which is really kind of amazing to me. And the first shows I worked on were Room 222, which won an Emmy that year as the best new comedy, and I was a story editor on that, and then Mary Tyler Moore. So it was just a lot of that is luck. I mean, it's random. I can't say okay, I was this great writer and everybody saw it and everything. It's just, it's getting into the room with people who are decision makers and somehow connecting with them, convincing them, and they read your material. So it's not a personality contest. It's based on if you're funny and if you can tell a story.
Well, what was the team behind the Mary Tyler Moore show? Like, what were they looking for in writers?
Well, the team was Jim Brooks and Alan Burns. Jim Brooks is, of course, went on to do movies, and Alan had a very successful career. They were at Room 222 when I went. Jim created that, so I had known them from there, and they said we're going to do Mary Tyler Moore, and we're going to do a show with an audience, which nobody had done since Dick Van Dyke, I think, went off the air. And so it was new for all of us to say, you're going to bring in a couple hundred people and they're going to laugh or they're going to not laugh. And so that was challenging and exciting and very nerve wracking to because the audience comes in and you don't know how they're going to respond. So that was a big leap, but I loved it.
Yeah, that's a. I feel like it's more unique these days. Like there are shows, and obviously there's SNL, and there are shows in front of a live audience. But that does sound like really intimidating. Of like, hey, we're gonna get live feedback for for this stuff as part of this. But what were the like on the behind the scenes? What were writers' rooms like back then?
They weren't really. And the beginning of that show, there were two guys. There was Jim and Alan, and they did all the stories. You work with them, and then you could be a story editor, but I didn't want to be a story editor because of my experience on Room 222 being thrown in because I became a story editor on my first script. I was crazy. So the pressure and the stress of having to do that, I felt was wrong. Looking back, I probably would have done it because I would have gotten a sense of how they ran the show much more, but I didn't. So
And story editor for anybody who's not familiar, including myself,
yeah,
is that what it sounds like? Someone who edits the story arc and all that.
absolutely. And it's you sit in the story meetings and you work with the writers, and then you go as far with the writers as you can, and then you eventually go into a room and uh, rewrite it. And it's a lot of meetings, a lot of stories. It's the most essential part of a uh, TV comedy show. Drama is more isn't rewritten in the same way that comedy is, so it's a whole different animal. But writing comedy is a matter of sitting there and trying to be funny every few lines in addition to keeping the story going. So that's why it's so rare to have really good comedy shows. You could name in the history of television, there's probably 10, maybe. I've never sat down and figured it out, 10, 15. It's very challenging a medium, and they kept shortening the amount of time uh, that but the amount of commercial time kept increasing and the amount of show time is less. So it's kind of an art to capture. You have a number of characters, so you have to take care. Each one has something to do, and you have a couple storylines going, and you've got to be funny. And you got to do that all in 23, 24 minutes at that point, 24. When it started, it's probably 122 now. So it's not much time to do all that.
Did you ever see it coming that like I feel like all the shows these days, because comedy's super popular, but as you mentioned, it's a tough nut to crack. Like it's tough to actually be really funny consistently. I feel like there's all these shows now and over the past decade that are like that dramedy, like comma and drama, comedy and drama, not comma. And like for example, like White Lotus is really popular now, and the past decade, Shameless was really popular, and like there's a lot of shows like that that have serious undertones but have a lot of comedy worked in. Like how do you balance that, like you were saying, of making sure that the story keeps going and it's compelling while making sure that there's still comedy kind of spliced into that?
Well, that comes down to a couple of things. One, the characters have to be funny, and then they need to have a real underpinning of reality, so that even Mary Tyler Moore was exceptional in terms of the definition of the characters. Each character on that was very, very well defined. And so you could go dramatic with them if you wanted to. It wasn't, there were a few dramatic shows that they did. I wrote one of them on anti Semitism, and I really wasn't crazy about going into something that dramatic, but they wanted me to write it, and so I did. And the show, because the characters were so well developed, the actors were exceptional, and the uh, producers knew what they were doing. You need all of that to make it exceptional. And that's a good kind of overview for what you need to have creativity in any business. You need a combination of leadership, clear values, and clear objectives, and a freedom to experiment and try different ways of doing things. I never thought of that parallel exactly like that. So,
Well, let's dive more into that. I think the show, we interview so many entrepreneurs, and so often creativity comes up, and it's an area that's of great interest to me. I would argue that you're somewhat interested in creativity as well, but
just a,
um, just a little bit. But it's been one of the foundational pillars of the show since episode one, and so I always love diving into it. But through the lens of entrepreneurship, like creating your own business, what makes creativity so crucial in the world of new ventures like that?
well, if you view business as a competition, then you need to differentiate yourself in order to win. And so it's as simple as that. What value do you add to the product you're offering that sets you apart from your competition? And I still think business schools don't fully understand and are suspicious of creativity. It sounds to them like it's, you know, I said, uh,
Well, we might have to keep that one in only because you called it out.
it's ethereal. It's something we don't do. We're businessmen. We're serious people. We aren't fluffy. And there's still a way to go to get businessmen, some businessmen. Now, there's a lot of areas that inherently call for creativity, but still aren't creative, like you were mentioning show business. Uh, there's a reason for that, and that is the structure of corporate business requires you to meet certain objectives, and creativity is inherently risky because it means doing things that you haven't done before.
Mm.
So let's look at, for example, the entertainment business and why you see so few shows that are different. Because the people who do the programming want to keep their job. And if they can say this worked before, didn't work this time, but it worked before, then they have a safety net, they feel. And so there's very few attempts to really do something extraordinary. And let's face it, if there's only a few shows in the history of television that are really creative, it, to get that level of creativity requires an extraordinary amount of both skill, luck, chemistry, all kinds of things, timing. So it's safer to just do what's been done before. So that's what people do.
Yeah, I love that. That's a real catch 22 of that. The natural default is if something's working, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Like
Yeah.
keep it going. You're seeing great results, whether it's a TV show or a business or a podcast or whatever. It's like obviously if people are liking it, you would think that they would like more of it. But that's also a huge trap of, well, that's a great way to become stale over time. Like if you never try anything risky or never try anything outside of the box, at some point you're going to lose people. So that's a really interesting point there. And I think when you look at creativity over the years, I'm sure it's changed hugely in terms of how it's taught, how it's thought about, how it's accepted since your early days in the writer's room. What's the biggest way that creativity has changed through your eyes?
In terms of the field itself or in terms of the world?
Well, I'm interested in both of those.
Okay, well, the field, I started in about 1990, around there, starting to think about transitioning into creativity. And at that point, it was a field that was pretty small and very segregated in different areas. So the encyclopedia came from in graduate school when I was getting my doctorate, going to the engineering library, the law library. I mean, why am I on all these libraries uh, when there's no cohesion? There wasn't a field of creativity, and so the idea of the encyclopedia was to kind of make people realize that it's applicable to uh, across the board, and it is a field worth studying. And it still has a long way to go as far as growing into a discipline, but at least it's on its way. So that's as a field, there are enough books, enough research that if anyone is interested in learning more about it, they can do so. And that was one of my objectives in going into it, was to try to enhance creativity in the world and help people understand that they can be creative even if they don't think they are. That there's a lot of myths that go into being a creative person and what creativity involves. As far as business goes, I believe there's more awareness now than there was 50 years ago. You have such tremendous advancement in technology that it's forcing people to be creative within certain ways. There were no podcasts like this 30 years ago. And you can name a lot of different fields where there have been incremental uh, increases, but you have the phone, and that's just exploded a lot of different opportunities. So this is a very good time to be creative, and I'm very interested in AI and what that can do, and whether it is or is not creative or can help you be more creative. So there's a lot of advancement, but there's so much more work to be done. If you look, for example, if you look at television, not just the shows, look at advertising, which was where I wanted to start because at the time it seemed creative. You look at those drug commercials, one after the other, they all look like the same. They all have the only thing creative are these ridiculous names they give the drugs. Maybe
Yeah.
Xylap, they have a lot of X's and Z's and Y's.
Xylophone. Yeah.
Yeah, they probably started with Xanax and it's gone from there. It's just, does anyone uh, behind this that spends all this money, they spend all these monies developing the drug, then they show everyone has somebody smiling because they don't have this whatever dysfunction anymore, the disease or skin rash or whatever the drug cures. It's just a parade of identical, expensive things going on that you wonder, does anyone have any idea? Do they think what they're doing is creative because they put a person of a different minority in the ad, or what's going on there? And I believe that's just let's do it the way it's always been done. Nobody's sitting there and saying, well, we should do something different.
Mm.
Not even well, the idea of something different is this much. So everything we see, and there's a diet with all the streaming and all the different, because I subscribe to most of them, and there are nights when you go, what am I going to watch? Because there's there's not the kind of original product with all the increase in product. You would think we would be in a golden age. We were for a little while, but it cycles in and out. It's not something you can control, but you can at least go for something. Spend your life trying to achieve some modicum of originality because you have it. You're born with it. You're not like anyone else. So why are you uh, suppressing that? And I believe creativity is a core ingredient in being alive and expressing yourself. And whether it works or not, the experience of it is who all of us as human beings, and God knows we need it these days.
It's upsetting but also inspiring what you just said, because I totally agree. I've always thought that um, pharma commercials are so boring. You're right. Like the most exciting thing is the name, and there's so much legal language in there that it takes up. They're like 2-minute long commercials where they're just reading all the side. Trying to cover themselves from a legal standpoint, and it's just kind of basic like B-roll in the background. And I feel like car commercials get very repetitive and boring as well. Ironically, the type of commercials that are the best and the funniest and have been for years are insurance, which is like the least exciting thing in the world.
Yeah, in a
And
way, you're right. Yeah, yeah. Because of that, because they have nothing to say
right.
about the product. It's all the same. So,
Exactly.
who can be funnier? By the way,
But
what's your favorite side effect? Mine is death. That's
That's a great one.
yeah,
It's definitely up there.
you know,
A little morbid.
side effect.
But the reason I was saying it's depressing as well and inspiring is um it's a reminder that like hey you like we have the ability as humans to shake things up and be original and be creative like that, but so often people are just focused on getting the next commercial out or getting the next podcast out or moving to the next task with their business, and they're not bringing that, like they're not giving themselves space to think or room to even be creative. From your standpoint, from your experience, how do you disrupt that? Like how do you say hey we're like let's force ourselves to do something a little bit more outside the box?
You just said it. Let's do it. Let's take the time. The crucial element is, first of all, committing to doing something, trying to make our product or what we do, our service, better. So it's about quality and it's about differentiating. It's as simple as how can we do this better? How can we make our product better or create a new product? Or how can we sell it better? How can we differentiate ourselves from our competition? Or how can we create something that is a new field? And people do that. That's that's a very big leap, but it starts with questioning. It starts with commitment. It starts with the idea that I'm going to make a certain amount of time out of my day to focus on creativity, and that's not a new idea. They uh, back in the 90s, 3M, I believe, was a company that allotted 15% of people's time for creativity to allow them to work out new ideas, and that worked out well. They came up with some really great products from allowing people to focus on that and not to get away from that. I've got to spend every minute doing what is basically routine work, and the pressure and stress of working a lot of hours can also disrupt any creative activity. I'm not sure. It'll be very interesting to see what the working at home versus working in the office, what'll be the results on that in terms of creative thinking and whether it helps or hurts. Commitment, though, is the first thing. You have to really decide you want that and it's a priority, and you're willing to understand that that requires uh, time, money, and a willingness to experiment.
Well, speaking of experimenting and the agonizing but also inspiring process of testing and repeating and throwing out drafts and all that, uh, you, as you hinted before, conceived and co-editor in chief of the Encyclopedia of Creativity. So first of all, thank you, because when you look this thing up, it's several hundred pages. It's probably people would call it the labor of love, a labor of love, but
It's
um
it's 2 volumes. This it's really
it's
not
about
a few hundred pages.
it's like one of those books that you see in cartoons that's like
Yeah,
1 foot tall,
it's
1 foot wide.
it's it's about 1,400 pages, and I and my co-editor on it, Mark Runco, are probably the only people that have read the whole thing. Although I had a student who came and said, "I read the whole thing before I came to
Oh,
study."
that's awesome.
So
Well, that's like what is it, that book everybody talks about? Infinite Jest, like or A Prayer for Owen Meany. Like there's all those books that are over 1,000 pages or
yeah.
super long. Um, and so anyway, so I guess the nice part of that is if you know, by the end of it, if you know nobody's paying attention, by the end of it, you could just mess around and just doodle and totally go off script in the last few pages. But I think it's awesome that you put this together, and it's a little bit meta, but it's inherently creative, putting together a work that's so daunting and so you know new and nothing of its kind like that. What between you and your co-editor, what what would you say was like the secret that made this all work and made you be able to produce such a prolific effort like this?
Well, again, luck plays a big part in it. I went to Mark Rugco. I was still in graduate school when I had this idea, and I met Mark Runco, who was one of the leading researchers in the field and prolific writer, editor, and told him I had this idea for the encyclopedia. And we tried to sell it as a popular work, which is still probably a possibility, but I moved on to other things. And we didn't sell it. We had an agent. We didn't sell it for the first 10 people. And he said, well, let's try to sell it as an academic work. And bang, we had a university academic uh, press, which was a leading publisher, and another leading publisher go for it. We'd already made the commitment to academic press, and that's been since purchased by Elsevier. And they had an excellent editor, Nikki Levy, that was on it and worked on it, and they just were great support in doing this, and it it took off in a way that we couldn't have anticipated. You never know, but the big thing that has happened with it is the individual articles get sold separately, and so Elsevier, which bought academic press, um, has made a very good living out of selling the articles. And I don't care whether it's the articles go online or not, because nobody except one student is going to read it from front to back. But it has a place in terms of being a source for serious academic publishing about creativity. So you cannot, in a way, it stopped me from doing a lot of the other research that I would have liked to do. In another way, it made a contribution. So it's always a compromise. Nothing always comes out the way exactly you want. But I'm delighted that I was able to do that, to come into a different field at a as a second career and make a contribution, and to work with the other thing that I worked with the American Psychological Association. There's a division on that includes creativity, and I worked with that division, and I worked with the Educational Coalition to do work on creativity in the classroom. And there were a number of people who served as deans of schools of education on this board, and they instituted some classes, a few of them in education, and I did a video. I'm not thrilled with it, but because it was very low budget, but it was on creativity in the classroom, and got to do some work on that area because that's been a particular interest of mine because of being a student that was incredibly bored. I mean, maybe that helped my career in comedy because I sat there doing my own jokes throughout my educational career and being a disruptor. And I just believe education should be open and fun, and that there's a long way to go on that area too.
Well, my only criticism of the Encyclopedia of Creativity is it's too short. I think you should have kept going. You've sold yourself short. No, I'm just kidding.
And we were hoping
But
to sell the movie rights, so it couldn't be too long.
yeah, exactly. Oh, it could be several sequels in there. But for anybody who's like working on a really long book like that, or any sort of creative output, whether it's a show or a podcast or video series, where it is such a lengthy process of doing it, what advice do you have for actually completing the thing and making sure your creativity flourishes throughout it?
Establish clear objectives uh, and break it down into pieces. And this is what I would suggest for writing, and I think it would be true for any creative activity. Allot the time and show up every day and spend the time regardless of what happens. Just commit that time. Some days will be fantastic, some days will be difficult. Break it into doable bites. Be willing to tear it apart if it doesn't work. It's there's no simple formula for creativity, which is a good thing because we see when there are simple formulas what happens. You get what you got before. So it's going to be challenging, it's going to be risky. I would say the most important thing is that you have a personal passion for what you're doing, that you have a stake in it, that you see the value, that it relates to who you are and who you want to be and what contribution you want to make to the world. If you're willing to do that, and if you don't have that, that would be the first thing to look at is what matters to you and what do you want to do? What does your contribution mean to you and to others?
When you look at the teaching side of things, let's say I think it's really cool. I hinted at the start, but for many years now, you've taught creativity, creative studies, stuff in that ballpark at Saybrook University. And one, I think it's awesome, and as you mentioned, it's come a long way that there's classes like that, and that there's that interest from students to learn from that. Obviously, I mean, who wouldn't want to take a class from you? Let's sign me up. But uh, in terms of like your teachings on creativity over the years, what's a specific aspect of creativity or like a lesson on creativity that students seem to be pretty consistently delighted and surprised by? It's like you've unlocked something for them.
Well, the first thing when we started was just the idea that they could study creativity. Early on, when we were starting this program, because we started a program that was pretty unique at that time. It wasn't the only one, but it was definitely new, and so we were doing basically pitches to the students we had, and one student had a epiphany. She said, "I had an epiphany," and she committed right away, and she did a great dissertation, and uh, so the idea itself, getting that to people that it's something they can study, something they can enhance, that it's not some deep mystery. A lot of mystery has been built around creativity, eureka, and it's moments that comes from space, and the idea that this is something we can learn about. We can't harness it. We can't make a formula for it. We don't want to. That would be anti uh, creative, but we can understand, as your questions you're asking, what do I do? How do I go about it? We can base it on successful people, but we can also say everybody has their own individual style and background and ability and desire on what they want to do. One of the first, when this was master's before we went to a doctorate, and I I kept it as a specialization along with my co. Well, I was the director, co person that worked with it. We kept it, Ruth Richards. We kept it as a specialization, even when the school wanted to make it a doctorate, because I felt that the market wouldn't understand a doctorate in creativity. I don't know if they would now or not. And I just felt that understanding psychology was an important aspect of it. And understanding psychology, your psychology, and what are your personal needs and what are your personal risk tolerance. And what I found and still find is people say, I don't have a creative bone in my body. And that drives me nuts because it's been inculcated in them that they aren't creative by probably either parents, teachers, or friends, that they can't do it. And so why even try? And we're losing a lot of creative energy from that. I'm concerned about all the lack of education in different economic levels and minorities, that we're losing somebody. My fantasy is we're losing somebody who could come up with an answer for global warming or for something that we need. We have so many crisis moments now that weren't even there uh, 30 years ago when I started studying this. And so I think the world needs all the creativity we can get. We've got challenges now that are to the whole survival of mankind. Who would sound like we're in a comic book? But it's happening, and it's happening faster than we could imagine. So I feel this is a very serious topic, and we need to really figure out how to get what as humanity needs to harvest whatever creativity we have as a species. First of all, to fight off artificial intelligence when it makes its move.
Right. Well, that's a whole series of TV shows and
Yeah, that's
movies in
great,
itself.
right? That's been the cliche forever. So I've got
Yeah.
my eye on it though. I think it might be making coffee in the morning. I'm not sure.
Well, it would be nice if it does the laundry for us and does the
No,
dishes
no,
and does
not
everything
for
that
me, for it.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
Well, what you just went through is really, really well said. And actually, we've come full circle with this podcast because we're on episode, we're in the 310s now in terms of episodes, the three teens, we'll call it. And
amazing.
way back on thank you. Way back in episode 2, our guest was my mentor, former coworker, a guy named Brendan O'Mara, and he's led digital marketing at like Bic and laundry companies and lots of really cool companies, and been in the agency world. Anyway, his like kind of quote word to live by is always, "I believe everyone is creative. You just need to get it out." Like everyone's got that creativity in them. It's just, to your point, the downside, the flip side of that is like, eh, for so many of us, it gets suppressed at a certain point, or you go in a different direction and you start to doubt yourself whether you are creative. And so, whatever we can do to keep that creativity flourishing, I'm totally with you. Can be the answer, or can point to a lot of the answers that we'll need. So, really, really well said. I can get behind that. I want to creatively I creatively had a grammar mispronunciation there. I want to creatively switch it up to wrap up with some rapid fire Q&A. You ready for it?
Sure.
All right, let's get wild. Actually, you keep bringing up AI, and I want to know your thoughts on AI. What do you think is a like a dream, awesome like use case for AI that you love in terms of creativity?
I love finding new answers to medical problems so we can have more drug ads.
And more side effects.
And I'll say one other thing that I'm finding it's very useful to interact for questions, not necessarily answers, but the questions that it generates, the answers generate, it can be pretty good. The questions you're asking. So far, I think it's not original thinking. So it's just a device right now, but as it grows, it's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, we work on some clips for Joe Pulizzi and Robert Rose. Joe's known as the godfather of content marketing, and him and his buddy and co-founder Robert always talk about in their show, whenever they talk about AI, they say, keep in mind, guy, it's like, because everybody's blown away by the capabilities right now. Keep in mind the stuff a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now is going to be so exponentially better at this stuff than what it is right now. It's pretty mind blowing to look ahead and see what's possible. But back to your answer, I think medical stuff, boring commercials aside, medical solutions is a pretty awesome use case for it. All right, what is something about teaching college student, or becoming a professor, that caught you by surprise? There's maybe a little bit more of a learning curve there than you anticipated.
Well, I think that anybody who teaches will say the time that it requires is you don't know why or how, but the time required to work with students getting a dissertation and is far more than I anticipated in preparing classes and all of the administrative things. So it's a very very time consuming job. I was hoping I would have more time to write, and you don't. Conference presentations, faculty meetings, administration, just goes on and on. So it's a real. It takes way more time than I ever thought it would.
If we can get AI to distort time to give us just a little bit extra time in each day when we need it, that would be pretty cool. So I'm sure that's coming. But on the flip side of that, what's been the most rewarding part about teaching students?
Helping students achieve life changing uh, experience. Uh, having a getting a PhD changes your life because you're forced to uh, ask questions about what you can prove is real and what you think. So that's the most important thing about it. It's not the topic, and it's not the contribution of the literature because most dissertations aren't aren't read, including mine, which really kind of irritated me because it was about comedy, right? I thought it would be sexy. Nobody cared.
Sounds sexy to me.
Yeah, it wasn't.
All right. Well, a couple sexy ones to wrap up. What is, rather, who is an actor or writer or just any person that you've met through your time in TV writing that was just knocked you off your socks how funny they were?
How funny they were. Oh,
Yeah.
that's oh wow. I can't think of anybody that knocked me out with how funny they were. I thought, but Jim Brooks was the most brilliant mind, and he was funny, but he was more than funny. He was able to spit out whole lines of dialogue that were wonderful. And when I would go in, I would write them down. One time he said, "Who? That was great." I said, "You wrote that? That I wrote it down." So he was in a class by himself as far as I feel the ability to do that job at a level that I never saw anyone else do it.
Blew himself away. That's hilarious. And then last one, you mentioned that there's only a handful really of like really really good comedy shows in the history of TV. What is one? What won't let you answer one that you worked on. What's one you didn't work on that from any time frame is just an iconic comedy show?
Hmm. Um, I I think there's not one one show. Maybe I love the Dick Van Dyke Show
Mm.
because of the humanity of it, and I love Carl Reiner's. There's another guy that I did get to meet and work with, who was extraordinary, just an extraordinary comic mind and a wonderful human being. Really a great guy. So I would say the Dick Van Dyke Show had that personal effect on me. There were other shows like All in the Family that I didn't get at first and I didn't write for, even though I could have. MASH. Uh, to say just one, there's a few. I liked Friends a lot, even though I don't think it had that kind of other quality. It was just kind of a funny, nice show. So there's a relative handful that make that leap to be really something you remember and would watch. And I hope we get more of them, and I hope that we're just in a kind of a period. It tends to go like that. Yeah,
Well,
I'm making waves. It goes in waves up and down for people listening.
appreciate it. Well, my wife Dana is a Friendsaholic. Friends is her favorite show of all time, so I can hear and feel her smiling as you're saying that. It's classic, and then I've turned her into a Seinfeld diehard as well.
Oh,
So
Seinfeld.
great
Yeah,
one.
how did I forget Seinfeld? That
There you
was
go.
great. Yeah, I mean, Frasier was a very good show, which I like because of the psychology angle, uh, and I think they did they did well. So you could probably come up with 10 good ones.
Everything else will feed them to the dogs. Well,
Yeah.
Stephen,
Sometimes people just want to watch. They don't want to be challenged. Or Larry David's show is
Curb. Yeah.
Curb Your Enthusiasm. I had some wonderful aspects to it, and so there's always somebody doing something good.
Yeah, absolutely legendary. Steven, thank you so much. This has been awesome. This has been like a mental vacation and brainstorm in the realms of creativity. So thank you so much. And I know if people want to learn more about you, they can check out the Encyclopedia of Creativity, which is super short. You can read it in one sitting, super easy. But
Wait for the movie.
yeah, exactly. Which will be an epic. But where's the best place? Like, if they want to get check that out, or if they want to connect with you in some form, like, where's the best place to reach out to you if
Well,
anybody's interested?
I'm ashamed to say I don't have a website. I've just been busy doing. I do have a website I'm developing, but called
Okay.
Dancing with the Trickster, about people's extraordinary experiences. But for me, you can uh, email me at spritzker, S in my last name, Pritzker, at saybrook.edu. I think that's how you found me. And so I do check that every day, and I should get a website, but I haven't yet.
Perfect. Well, who needs a website? Your work speaks for itself. But really appreciate it. And the last thing, final thoughts. It could be a quote, words to live by. It could be a one liner, whatever you want. Just send us home here.
Um, you're more creative than you think.
Bring on the bongos.